It started as a joke, not the kind that makes people laugh, but the kind that makes powerful men feel more powerful. Inside the private cigar lounge on the 71st floor of the Lexington Tower, everything smelled like old money and fresh cruelty. The air was heavy with scotch, smoke, and arrogance. Leather seats groaned under the weight of suits worth more than most people's yearly salaries. And in the corner, where the light was dimmest but the voices the loudest, sat Julian Roth, the man who'd turned code into gold and silence into strategy. He wasn't drunk. Julian never drank enough to blur judgment, but he was bored, and that, for a man like him, was infinitely more dangerous. "You ever wonder," Blake drawled, tapping ash into a crystal tray, "how much it'd take to buy a girl like that?" He nodded toward a young woman across the room's slim frame, hair pulled into a tight bun, uniform too big for her body. She was carrying a tray of drinks, with the kind of posture that said she didn't want to be seen, only tolerated. Julian barely looked. "Which one?" "The shy one," Blake said. "The waitress who keeps her eyes on the floor. Probably hasn't had a real meal in days. You could buy her night for the price of a steak." Julian's smirk was slow, cynical. "And what would be the point?" Blake leaned in, voice lowering like it was some sacred dare. "Bet you can't do it without offering more than a few words. No lawyers, no contracts, no bodyguards. Just you, her, one night, all yours." Julian should have walked away, but his ego was a living, breathing thing fed by winds, starved by indifference. And there was something about Blake's tone, the way the other men chuckled under their breath, that rubbed wrong. Julian didn't lose, not in business, not in poker, and certainly not in anything that involved control. He set down his glass and stood. "The girl Lily," her name tag said, was at the far end of the room, trying to fix a wobbling tray. Her hands trembled. One glass tilted, almost fell. She caught it just in time. Julian approached like he did everything in life, with certainty, with purpose, with the silence of a man who didn't need to announce his presence to be felt. When she looked up, their eyes met for the first time, and something inside him went still, not because she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. She wasn't. Not because she batted her lashes or bit her lip like the others did. She didn't. She looked at him like she was already preparing to apologize, like she knew men like him only came with consequences. He said 5 words. "Come with me, one night." She blinked. "What?" He reached into his wallet, pulled out a black titanium card, and held it between 2 fingers. "No strings, no questions. Just say yes." Her eyes flicked to the card, then back to his face. She didn't move. She didn't smile. But she said yes, and he didn't know it then, but in that moment, the moment he thought he was buying her body, she had already started to take ownership of something he never meant to sell: his mind. Julian Roth wasn't a man who needed to ask twice. That alone made Lily's hesitation more interesting than her answer. Most women who stood in front of him trembled for the right reasons: lust, greed, ambition. But she trembled like she'd been trained by the world to expect danger behind every outstretched hand. He noticed it the moment she followed him into the private elevator, standing just slightly behind him, arms folded tight across her chest, eyes cast downward. Not submissive, protective. There was a difference, and Julian, though he rarely bothered to notice nuance, caught it in her like a glitch in a perfect code. He didn't speak on the ride up, neither did she. The silence wasn't awkward, it was observant. She studied the floor like it held secrets. He studied her like she was an unsolved formula. When the elevator doors slid open to the top-floor suite, she didn't gasp, didn't compliment the view, didn't even flinch at the soft automation that welcomed Mr. Roth back. She just stepped inside, slipped off her shoes quietly, and asked, "Where do you want me?" He almost said it, something crude, careless, like he would have with anyone else. But the words died in his throat. because she wasn't looking at him with flirtation or fear. She was looking at him like she'd already given up 100 pieces of herself to survive, and this was just one more she could afford to lose. Julian poured her a glass of water, handed it to her without a word. She took it without thanks. He gestured to the couch. She sat, still no questions, still no tears. Her calmness unnerved him. He'd expected resistance, or seduction. What he got was resignation, and he wasn't sure what to do with that. "What's your name?" he asked finally. She hesitated, then, "Lily." "Last name? Why does it matter?" "Because I don't like doing business with ghosts," he said. Her lip twitched, like a laugh was trying to escape and didn't dare. "Then you shouldn't try to buy people. We all disappear eventually." He stared at her, more curious than insulted. "You always talk like that?" "Only when I know the other person won't remember it in the morning." That stung more than he admitted, not because it was wrong, but because for the first time in a long time he didn't want to forget. He sat across from her, studying her in the dim light. She was pretty in that way most men missed: no makeup, no perfume, just clean lines and quiet defiance. Her hair was tied back so tightly it pulled at her temples. Her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her uniform. She didn't cross her legs or arch her back or do any of the things women usually did when trying to sell a version of themselves. She was simply there, real, raw, like the truth he didn't know he was starving for. "You can still leave," he said. She looked up sharply. "And lose the money?" He shrugged. "It's not worth your peace." "I don't have peace," she said, voice flat. "Just debt. And a little brother who needs surgery before the month ends." That explained the darkness behind her eyes, the urgency, the cold calculation behind every breath she took. She wasn't selling herself out of weakness. She was sacrificing because no one else would do it for her. He stood up, walked to the minibar, poured himself a scotch. "I won't touch you unless you ask me to." Her head tilted slightly. "That part of the bet, too?" He turned slowly. "No, that part's just me." For the first time, her expression shifted. Confusion, maybe. A flicker of something she didn't trust, but she didn't push back. "Fine," she said. "Then I won't ask, not tonight." Julian nodded. "Then stay. Eat something. Sleep, if you want. The money's yours regardless." She blinked slowly. "You really don't want anything?" "Not yet," he said truthfully. "I want to see what happens when you finally exhale." She didn't respond, but she didn't leave either. And in that quiet, in that strange ceasefire between power and permission, something began to unravel, not in her, but in him. He didn't know what to call it yet, only that it felt dangerous and irreversible. Julian didn't sleep that night. He didn't expect to. After Lily disappeared into the guest room, quiet, deliberate, like a ghost trying not to disturb furniture, he poured another scotch and sat alone in the living room, lights dimmed, the city flickering against the glass. He told himself he was just thinking, that this was just another encounter in a long list of impulsive indulgences. But something about her silence scratched against his certainty. He'd met women who cried when they were touched, women who screamed to be seen, women who weaponized their vulnerability like currency. But Lily did none of that. She didn't beg, didn't seduce. She simply existed, like someone who'd stopped asking for anything a long time ago. And somehow, that made him want to give her everything. By morning, she was already awake. He found her in the kitchen barefoot, hair still damp from a shower, wearing a plain white shirt from the guest closet, and leggings that clung to her frame like second skin. She moved with efficiency, not grace, like someone who never had the luxury of wasting energy. "There's coffee," she said when he entered without turning. "I didn't know how you'd take it, so I guessed." He poured a cup, took a sip. Black, strong, perfect. "You guessed right." "Figures," she murmured. "Men like you always drink things bitter." He raised an eyebrow. And what kind of men do you think I am? The kind who doesn't believe in softness unless it's under control. That stopped him. Not because it wasn't true, but because she'd said it so plainly, so unflinchingly. You think I brought you here to control you? Didn't you? She asked, finally turning. Her eyes met his green, steady, unafraid. Isn't that what this all is? A game of who holds the power longer? He leaned against the counter, watching her. What if I said I'm tired of winning? Then I'd say you don't know what losing feels like yet. They didn't speak again for a while, but the silence wasn't hostile. It was heavy, full of questions neither of them had the language to ask. That afternoon he offered her a tour of the place. She agreed, following him from room to room, touching nothing, observing everything. When they reached the library, 2 stories of old leather and wood, dustless and pristine, she finally said, You have all these books. Do you ever read any of them? Sometimes. Which one's your favorite? He walked to a shelf, pulled out a weathered copy of East of Eden, and handed it to her. She ran her fingers along the spine. Steinbeck, figures. Why? Because it's about broken men trying to rewrite their own fate. Aren't we all? He said. Not all of us get to. That night she didn't return to the guest room. She sat beside him on the sofa instead, feet tucked under her, staring at the city lights with a furrowed brow. He asked if she wanted wine. She shook her head. I want to ask you something, but I don't know if you'll answer it honestly. Try me, he said. Was I really a bet? The words were quiet, but not small. He didn't look away. Yes. She exhaled like someone absorbing a blow without letting it land. And now? Now, I don't know what the hell this is. She nodded slowly. That's honest enough. He reached out, not to touch her skin, but her hand. She let him. It was the first time she let him initiate contact without pulling away. Her fingers were colder than expected, but they curled around his like memory. Why did you say yes that night? He asked. Because you didn't ask me to smile, or lie, or pretend I like the way you looked at me. You just asked, and I needed the money, but now... Now what? Now I can't tell if I'm still paying a debt or creating one. He wanted to say something, anything, but instead he just held her hand tighter. That night, they didn't sleep in separate rooms. He led her to his bed, pulled back the sheets, and lay beside her fully clothed, barely touching. But it was the most intimate thing he'd done in years. At some point around 3 a.m., she whispered into the dark, Do you ever feel like you're pretending to be a person? Every day, he replied. Then what happens when someone sees the real you? They usually leave. Maybe, she said, curling into his chest. Or maybe they just don't know how to stay yet. He didn't reply, but his arms closed around her like the answer she needed wasn't in words. And somewhere in that fragile space between bodies and breath, something began to form. Not love, not yet, but the terrifying possibility of it. The next morning came with sunlight he didn't expect. It spilled through the glass like it had something to prove, crawling over the hardwood floors, climbing up the edge of the bed, warming skin that hadn't been touched by softness in what felt like forever. Julian woke first. He always did, but this time he didn't move. He just watched the girl beside him sleep. Lily's face was turned slightly toward him, lashes dark against her cheeks, lips parted in a breath that felt too vulnerable for this world. Her hand was still resting on his chest, fingers curled slightly like they'd tried to hold on even in sleep. She didn't look like a conquest. She looked like a confession he hadn't meant to whisper out loud. He should have left the bed, gotten up, made coffee, checked emails, but something in him didn't want to break the moment. Not yet. So he stayed. When she stirred, her body tensed, first an old habit, maybe, muscle memory from waking in unfamiliar beds or around unfamiliar men. But when she opened her eyes and saw him still there, still watching, something softened. She blinked slowly. "You didn't leave." "I couldn't," he said. "Why?" "Because if I moved, I was afraid you wouldn't be real anymore." They stayed like that for a while, neither of them speaking, letting the quiet stretch between them like a thread pulling tighter with each second. Finally, Lily sat up, pulling her hair into a loose knot, the collar of his shirt slipping slightly off her shoulder. Julian sat up too, legs over the edge of the bed, elbows on knees, watching her without apology. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Anything." "What's the worst thing you've ever done?" He hesitated, not because he didn't know, but because he wasn't used to answering honestly. "I once bought a company just to fire someone who insulted me. 300 people lost their jobs in the merger. I never flinched. I slept like a baby that night." She didn't look surprised. "And the second worst?" "This bet," he said, "because I didn't think it would matter. But now it's the only thing I think about." She looked at him then, really looked, and for a moment he wondered if she could see everything. The arrogance, the loneliness, the boy he used to be before the world demanded he become someone sharp. "You asked me once why I said yes," she said. "I never gave you the full answer." "Why?" "Because I needed to know if I could survive it. If I could walk into a room, give myself to a man like you, and still recognize my reflection afterward." "Did you?" "Not at first," she whispered. "But then you didn't touch me. You didn't ask for anything, and that made me feel something I haven't felt in years." "What?" "Safe." The word hit him harder than it should have. Maybe because he didn't remember the last time someone used it in a sentence that included him. He reached for her hand. She didn't flinch this time. "Tell me what happened to you," he said, voice low. "Only if you're ready to hear it without fixing it," she replied. "Try me." And so she told him. About the uncle who started walking into her room when she was 13. About the mother who told her it was just imagination. About the years of silence, of drifting from couch to couch, from jobs that paid in tips and humiliation. About her little brother, the only reason she hadn't disappeared completely. "I learned how to survive," she said, "but I stopped believing anyone could touch me without trying to take something." Julian didn't speak. He just sat there, absorbing each word like it had weight. When she finally looked at him, she expected pity. She got stillness. And then slowly he moved closer, not reaching for her body, but for her gaze. "What if I want to give something back instead?" "Then you'll have to start small," she said. "Trust isn't something you buy in bulk." He smiled, soft, broken. "Then I'll start with tonight." They didn't rush. When he leaned in to kiss her, it wasn't with heat, it was with hesitation. She met him halfway, not out of obligation, but choice. Her fingers tangled in his shirt, his hand cupped her jaw like it was the most fragile thing he'd ever held. When he undressed her, it wasn't stripping, it was unwrapping, layer by layer. Not just fabric, but memory. When her shirt hit the floor, she didn't cover herself. She stood tall, scars and all, and let him see. "Do you still want me?" she asked. He looked at her like she was the answer to a question he didn't know he'd been asking his whole life. "I didn't come here to want you," he said, "but now I don't know how to want anything else." They fell into the bed like people who had stopped running. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't pretty. It was real. And when they finally moved together, it wasn't lust. It was recognition. Two souls who'd worn too much armor for too long, finally letting each other see the bruises underneath. She didn't cry. He almost did. And in the moments after, when her head was on his chest and their legs tangled under the sheets, Julian Rothman, who had never needed anyone, whispered something he'd never told another soul. "You're the first person who made me feel like We're being touched. And Lily, whose life had been defined by people taking, finally felt what it meant to be held. Julian didn't recognize himself anymore, not in the way he paused before leaving for meetings just to watch her tie her hair up in the mirror, not in the way he found excuses to cancel board calls because she fell asleep on the couch and he didn't want to wake her, and definitely not in the way he started keeping her favorite yogurt in the fridge, the kind with the glass jars and the fruit at the bottom. Billionaires didn't adjust their routines for anyone. But she wasn't just anyone. She was Lily. And ever since the night he undressed her body with reverence instead of hunger, ever since she undressed his pride with a touch softer than his own thoughts, nothing had been the same. They didn't talk about what happened that night, not directly, but it lived between them, in the subtle way she leaned into his shoulder while reading, or how he placed his hand on the small of her back when she moved past him. It wasn't possessive, it was grounding, a shared gravity neither of them had the language for yet. But the world had a way of sniffing out peace and ruining it. The news broke 2 days later, not from him, not from her, but from someone who'd been watching, a leaked image, grainy, blurry, but recognizable enough. Julian Roth entering his penthouse with a girl in a service uniform. The caption below it read, "Roth's new charity project," or something else. Lily saw it before he did. He found her sitting at the dining table, phone in hand, face pale. "They know," she said. "Just that. Nothing more." He took the phone, saw the photo, felt his stomach twist. "It's garbage. They're speculating." "They're exposing," she replied, "and I'm not the one they're dragging." Julian tried to speak, to explain that it would blow over, that this wasn't the first time the press tried to dissect his private life, but she cut him off. "You can disappear into your money, Julian. I can't. I'm the girl they'll label, humiliate, meme into shame. And what do I say? That I sold my body and accidentally fell for the man who bought it?" Her voice cracked, and that broke something in him. "You didn't sell anything," he said. "I did. I sold a piece of myself when I made that bet. You just walked in and made me regret it." She stood up then, restless, pacing like the walls were closing in. "I can't go back to work. People will stare, the girls will whisper, the manager will fire me because I'm bad optics." "Then don't go back," he said. "Stay here. I'll take care of everything." But that was the wrong thing to say. She froze, spun around slowly, eyes wide with something that wasn't just hurt. It was betrayal. "Stay here? As what, Julian? Your secret? Your kept woman?" "No, because it sounds a lot like a gilded cage. No keys, no dignity." He took a step forward. She took one back. "You said I made you feel safe," he whispered. "You did," she said, "until now." Silence fell like a blade, heavy, sharp, final, and then as quietly as she had entered his life, she turned and walked out of it. He didn't stop her, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know how to hold someone without hurting them. For the next 3 days, he didn't sleep. He tried, but every room felt colder, every sound too loud, every second without her hand in his, unbearable. He thought of calling, texting, sending a car, but none of it felt right. None of it would be enough, because Lily didn't need grand gestures. She needed truth, and he'd been giving her everything but that. On the 4th night, he found himself standing in front of the staff building she once mentioned, her part-time job at a tutoring center. It was nearly midnight. Lights were off, but he stayed, sat on the steps, waited. He didn't know for what. Redemption, maybe. Forgiveness. A glimpse of her silhouette walking toward him with the same reluctant grace she always carried. But she never came. Back at the penthouse, he wandered into the guest room she once slept in. It still smelled faintly of lavender and paint. On the nightstand, folded neatly, was the copy of East of Eden he once gave her. A sticky note on the cover read, "Broken men can be rewritten, but they have to pick up the pen themselves. That's when he knew. This wasn't about the media, or the money, or the game he played like life was a poker table, and every feeling a chip to bluff. This was about her, and how she saw him when no one else dared. This was about being undone in the most terrifyingly honest way possible, not with sex, not with shame, but with softness. Julian canceled 3 meetings that day, fired his PR manager, released a personal statement not to the press, but through a video recorded in his office. No script, no spin, just a man with dark circles under his eyes saying, "I made a bet, and I lost. But what I gained was the first reason I've had in years to stop hiding." And across the city, in a studio apartment barely held together by secondhand furniture and fading wallpaper, Lily watched that video, curled on her mattress, clutching her knees. And for the first time since she walked away, she cried, not because she was broken, but because maybe, just maybe, someone was trying to rebuild with her, not around her. Lily didn't respond to the video, not with a call, not with a message, not even a whisper through mutual connections. But she watched it again, and again. Each time, her breath hitched in the same place when his voice cracked, barely audible, confessing, "I didn't fall in love because she let me touch her. I fell because she touched something I didn't know I had left." She didn't cry the 4th time. Or the 5th. By the 6th, she just sat quietly, fingers pressed against her lips, like holding them there might stop the ache from spreading. It would have been easier if he had tried to find her, if he'd sent flowers or showed up at her door with some grand apology. But he didn't. And maybe that's why it hurt more, because he respected the silence, respected her no, gave her space without trying to win her back. It was the first time anyone had ever let her leave without being punished for it. A week passed, then 2. Julian kept living, but it didn't feel like living. He went to meetings but left them halfway through, signed documents he didn't remember reading, ate meals that tasted like paper. The penthouse echoed louder now. Every room reminded him of her, how she used to hum in the kitchen, how her hair left strands on his pillows, how she always read the last page of a book before starting it. "Because I need to know if the pain is worth it," she once said. "I don't like wasting heartbreak." One night, unable to sleep, he returned to the rooftop garden, her favorite place. She once called it a lie made of flowers. She said it felt like a place where people came to pretend the world was softer. He'd laughed at the time. Now he understood. He sat on the bench where she once curled her legs beside him and whispered her childhood fears into the dark. He sat there for hours, watching the city lights blur, the same way her absence blurred everything else. Across the city, Lily stood behind a glass window at the children's center, where she volunteered. One of the boys was painting her shoes blue on the left, red on the right, and laughing. She smiled, but her eyes didn't. The program director noticed. "You've been somewhere else lately," she said gently. "Want to talk?" Lily shook her head. "No, I'm still figuring out where somewhere even is." That night, while washing the paint off her legs, she found a letter in her mailbox. No return address, just her name, in handwriting she recognized. Inside, a single page. "I don't want to rewrite what I broke. I want to start where you left off. If you ever want to talk, no contracts, no bets, just truths. I'll be at the bookstore on 9th Saturday at 4 p.m. And if you don't come, I'll sit there anyway, because maybe it'll remind me what it felt like to hope." She stared at the note for a long time, folded it, unfolded it, folded it again. When Saturday came, she didn't dress up, just wore jeans, a soft sweater, and the same coat she'd worn the night they met. She told herself she was just passing by, that she didn't care if he was there. But when she pushed open the door, the bells above rang like a verdict, and there he was, sitting by the window, one hand wrapped around a mug, the other flipping a page he hadn't read in 10 minutes. He didn't see her at first, but when he did, he didn't smile. He didn't stand. He just exhaled slowly, like someone finally remembering how to breathe. She walked to the table, sat down. They stared at each other for a moment that felt like years. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I wasn't sure you meant it," she replied. "I did, every word." She looked down at the table, tapped her fingers once, then asked, "Why didn't you chase me?" He answered without hesitation. "Because I didn't want to treat your pain like a finish line. I wanted you to come back because you wanted to, not because I begged you." That landed differently. She looked at him again, something shifting in her eyes. "I hated you," she whispered. "When I found out." "I hated me too." They sat in silence, letting that confession sink. "Why here?" she finally asked. "Because you once told me bookstores are the only places where you feel like you don't have to be anything but quiet." She blinked, once, twice, then smiled, barely, but it was real. "Tell me what you want from me, Julian, but only if it's not everything, because I can't give you that, not yet." "I don't want everything," he said. "I want coffee on Sundays and silence that doesn't hurt. I want a reason to come home that isn't built on guilt. I want the version of me you see because when you look at me, I don't feel like I have to perform." Her eyes filled. "That's not nothing." "I know," he said. "It's the only thing that ever felt like something." She reached across the table, took his hand. Her fingers didn't tremble this time. "Then let's start there," she said, "and see what grows." He didn't kiss her, didn't ask to. He just held her hand like it was the most sacred thing he'd ever been given. And for the first time in a long, lonely stretch of trying to be more than what the world demanded, Julian Roth stopped performing and started simply being. 3 months passed, quietly, deliberately. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic reunions broadcast under city lights. Just two people learning how to exist beside each other without flinching. Lily didn't move into the penthouse. Julian didn't ask her to. Instead, he visited her studio every Sunday morning with 2 cups of coffee and a paperback tucked under his arm. Sometimes she let him stay. Sometimes she didn't. But when she did, they talked. About books, about the smell of rain, about the strange ache that lives in the ribcage when silence lasts too long. Not once did he try to touch her without permission. Not once did she have to ask for space she wasn't given. He never called her his. She never asked to be. And yet, they belonged to something they were building with more caution than bricks, more truth than promises. One rainy afternoon, they lay on her floor, surrounded by paint-stained towels and the smell of lavender soap. He was tracing the freckles on her arm like constellations when she asked, "Do you still think about the bet?" He didn't pretend not to know which one. "Yes," he said, "almost every day." "And what do you feel when you do?" He didn't answer right away, just turned to look at her, really look at her, the way she used to look at him when he thought no one ever could. "Grateful," he finally said, "because if I hadn't taken that bet, I would have never met the one person who saw me and didn't flinch." She closed her eyes, exhaled. "I used to think anyone who wanted my body just wanted to own me." "And now?" he asked. She opened her eyes again. "Now I know that someone who truly sees you doesn't try to own anything. They protect what's already yours." "What's that?" he whispered. "Yourself," she said. "Your quiet, your chaos, your heartbeat." He pulled her close, not with urgency but with reverence, and she let him, not because she forgot the past, but because she finally believed he wouldn't use it against her. They didn't need to say "I love you." They just needed to stay, and they did. Through missed calls, through late nights, through old habits, they had to break with patience. She still flinched sometimes. He still shut down when he was afraid. but they stayed, and that was more honest than any vow either of them had ever heard. In a world that measured value by performance, they chose something slower, something braver, something real, because sometimes the mistake that breaks you wide open is the very thing that lets the light in. And sometimes the night you thought would ruin you becomes the reason you finally come home to yourself. He thought he was buying her body for one night, but she ended up claiming his entire mind, and in the end, that was the only bet that ever truly mattered, the one he lost, to win something worth keeping.